Hey, what if I told you that one of the most horrifying child exploitation networks in American history wasn't hidden in some dark corner of the world? It was happening right in the middle of a Native American reservation in Oklahoma, and the people doing it. They weren't strangers, they were trusted adults, community members. People these kids knew, and it took the FBI years to bring them down. This is Operation Stovewood, and this might be the most disturbing case you've never heard of. Welcome to Deception Reports. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Deception Reports, the channel where we dig deep into the cases, scandals, and cover-ups that the mainstream media moves on from way too fast. Today we are going deep, real deep, into a federal investigation called Operation Stovewood, one of the largest child sex trafficking investigations ever conducted on Native American land in the United States. We're talking about dozens of victims, multiple predators, years of abuse, and a system that failed these children over and over again until the FBI finally stepped in. Grab some water, sit down, and pay attention, because every single part of this story matters. Let's get into it. To understand Operation Stovewood, you first need to understand where this happened, because location is everything in this case. We're talking about the Muskogee Nation, also known as the Creeka Nation, a federally recognized Native American tribe located in eastern Oklahoma, centered around the city of Muskogee. Now, Native American reservations in the United States operate under a complicated legal structure. Tribal land has its own government, its own laws in many cases. But when it comes to serious federal crimes, the FBI has jurisdiction. And that legal complexity, that's actually one of the reasons this abuse went on for so long. These communities already deal with high levels of poverty, limited resources, substance abuse issues, and a deep-rooted distrust of outside law enforcement. And that's not me being judgmental. That's documented history. These communities were repeatedly failed by the American government for over a century. So when predators showed up looking for vulnerable children, they found them, and they knew exactly how to exploit the environment around them. What was actually happening? Let's talk about what Operation Stovewood was actually uncovering, because this wasn't just one bad guy. This was an organized, multi-predator child sex trafficking network operating within and around the Muskogee Nation territory in Oklahoma. Adult men, some from the community, some from outside it, were targeting Native American children, many of them minors between the ages of roughly 12 to 17 years old. These predators used a method that investigators describe as classic grooming and exploitation. Here's how it worked. Step 1. Find the vulnerable. They specifically targeted children who came from unstable home environments, kids dealing with poverty, parental substance abuse, neglect, children who were already struggling and desperate for attention, stability, or belonging. Step 2. Offer something. Money, food, a place to stay, alcohol, drugs. These predators offered things that made struggling kids feel like they finally had someone looking out for them. This is textbook grooming to make the victim feel special, make them feel seen. Step 3. Exploit. Once trust was built, the abuse began. Children were sexually exploited, and in many cases, they were exploited by multiple men. This wasn't just abuse. This was trafficking. These kids were being passed around. Step 4. Keep them silent. Through manipulation, threats, drugs, shame, these predators made sure the kids stayed quiet. And in communities where distrust of law enforcement already exists, staying quiet is often the easier option for a scared, vulnerable child. How the FBI got involved. So how did this come to light? The investigation, officially named Operation Stovewood, was launched by the FBI's Oklahoma Field Office, specifically targeting child sexual exploitation on Native American lands. This was part of a broader FBI initiative called the Innocence Lost National Initiative, which was created to combat child sex trafficking across the country. But Operation Stovewood became one of the most significant cases to come out of that program. Investigators began receiving information, tips, reports, fragments of stories that something deeply wrong was happening in the Muskogee area. And as they started pulling on those threads, the full picture began to emerge. The FBI spent years building this case. We're talking patient, methodical investigative work, interviewing victims, gathering evidence, building trust with a community that had every historical reason not to trust federal agents. And that part is important, because getting victims to talk especially traumatized children from marginalized communities, is incredibly difficult. It takes time. It takes trained investigators. And it takes real relationship building. The arrests. Who were these people? Now here's the part that made this case explode when it became public. The men arrested weren't random outsiders. Many of them were known in the community. Some were adults who had regular access to young people through family connections, community roles, or simply through living in the same area. Over the course of the investigation, the FBI made a series of arrests, ultimately charging dozens of individuals with federal crimes, including sex trafficking of minors, production of child sexual abuse material, CSAM, distribution of CSAM, coercion and enticement of minors, traveling across state lines for the purpose of sexual exploitation. The names and faces of the convicted are a matter of public federal court record, and what's striking is the range of people involved. Different ages, different backgrounds, which tells you this wasn't one isolated predator. This was a network. And federal charges are serious. We're talking about mandatory minimum sentences in many cases. Some defendants receive sentences of 10, 15, 20 years or more in federal prison. The victims, the most important part. Now, I need to stop here for a second because in cases like this, it's very easy to get caught up in the crime, the investigation, the arrests, and forget who this is really about. The victims. The FBI identified over 20 child victims through the course of Operation Stovewood, and those are just the ones they were able to identify and document. The real number is almost certainly higher because in trafficking cases, many victims never come forward. These were children, Native American kids living on or near reservation land, already dealing with systemic disadvantages that most of us can't even imagine, and then on top of that, they were preyed upon by adults who were supposed to be part of their world. Many of these kids had experienced trauma before the abuse even started. Broken homes, food insecurity, addiction in their families, and the predators, in this case, specifically looked for that. They looked for kids who were already on the edge, because those kids are easier to manipulate. The psychological damage from this kind of exploitation is lifelong. These aren't just statistics. These are real people who carried these experiences into adulthood. Why did this happen? The deeper why. Okay, so let's zoom out, because a lot of people look at a case like this and ask, how does something like this happen for so long? And there are several answers to that. Reason 1. Systemic vulnerability. Native American communities in the U.S. face some of the highest rates of poverty, unemployment, substance abuse, and violent crime in the entire country. This isn't a coincidence. It's the direct result of centuries of government policies that stripped these communities of land, resources, and autonomy. Traffickers and predators know this. They deliberately target the most vulnerable communities. Reason 2. Jurisdictional confusion. For a long time, crimes on Native American land existed in a legal gray zone. Who has jurisdiction? Tribal, police, state, or federal? This confusion meant that some crimes fell through the cracks. It wasn't until landmark Supreme Court decisions and updated federal laws that clarity improved. But for years, that confusion protected criminals. Reason 3. Distrust of law enforcement. Native American communities have deep, historically justified reasons to distrust the federal government and law enforcement. This means victims are less likely to report, witnesses are less likely to talk, and investigators face a much harder road. Reason 4. Normalization through grooming. When abuse is introduced gradually, when victims are manipulated into thinking this is normal or that they have no choice, they often don't identify themselves as victims. This is how long-term exploitation operates. The victims often don't even realize they can get help. The aftermath and legacy. So what happened after Operation Stovewood? The convictions kept coming. Federal prosecutors built solid cases. Many defendants pleaded guilty rather than go to trial. Others were convicted by juries. Either way, they went to federal prison. The case was cited by the FBI as a landmark investigation, proof that with patience, resources, and community partnership, even deeply embedded exploitation networks can be dismantled. It also sparked broader conversations about Native American child safety. Congress and tribal governments began looking more seriously at resources for child protection on reservation land. The missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, MMI, crisis Operation Stovewood exists within a larger context of Native women and children being disproportionately targeted for violence and exploitation. This case added fuel to the urgent call for action on that crisis. Federal resource allocation advocates use this case to argue for more FBI resources dedicated specifically to Native American communities. But here's the hard truth for every network that gets shut down. There are others operating in the shadows. The systems that create vulnerability, poverty, broken families, lack of resources are still very much in place. What this case teaches us. Operation Stovewood teaches us several things that apply far beyond just this one case. Predators are strategic. They don't pick victims randomly. They find the most vulnerable. They gain trust slowly. And they operate in environments where they feel protected. Communities need resources, not just investigations. Law enforcement matters, but so does economic investment. Mental health services, education, and stable housing. Addressing root causes reduces vulnerability. Victims deserve to be believed. One of the hardest parts of any trafficking case is that victims often recant or never come forward at all. Creating safe environments where victims can speak without fear is essential. Federal jurisdiction on tribal land matters. The legal clarity that allowed the FBI to operate in this case was critical. Without federal authority and resources, this network might never have been dismantled. And that is the full story of Operation Stovewood. From the vulnerable children who were targeted, to the predators who exploited them, to the years-long FBI investigation that finally brought justice. This case is a reminder that evil doesn't always look the way we expect it to. Sometimes, it lives right in the middle of a community, hiding behind familiarity and trust. The children in this case deserved better from their community, from the systems around them, and from a country that has historically failed Native American people over and over again. But because of the investigators who refused to give up, because of the victims who found the courage to speak, and because of the tribal community members who finally trusted enough to help these predators are behind bars. If this video opened your eyes to something you didn't know about before, that's exactly why deception reports exist. Hit that subscribe button if you're new here. Share this video because awareness is one of the most powerful tools we have. Drop a comment below. I want to hear your thoughts on this case. I'll see you in the next one. Stay informed, stay alert, and never stop questioning.